So today, do you know, our lives could be altered for eternity today. The way you think about life could be altered for eternity today. We can step in a whole new space and place, a whole new expression of who and what we are. For those of you who are new, my name is Reverend Denise Schubert. I am one of the spiritual leadership, members of the spiritual leadership team, and it is my pleasure to, this is the third of 3 talks on the heart, opening your heart, taking off that no trespassing sign. But before I begin, I know you're all eager. Yes. So there was a Dutchman in Amsterdam that needed to confess, so he went to his priest. He said, "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned." And the priest says, continue. Because during World War II, I hid a Jewish man in my attic. "Well," answered the priest, "that's not a sin." "Well, I made him pay me 20 gulden for each week he stayed." I don't know what the equivalent of that is in dollars, but... And the priest replied, "Well, I admit that wasn't the most generous of things, but I'm sure it was what you had to do at the time." So the Dutchman exclaimed, "Oh, thank you, Father. That eases my mind. But I do have one more question." "What is it, son?" asked the priest. And the Dutchman said, "Well, do I need to tell him that the war is over?" I do have to dig deep sometimes for these jokes. Anyway, so again, this is our third week on the heart, the journey of illumination, of transforming, of awakening. We have explored our having no trespassing signs on our hearts to keep us from experiencing the pain of love, betrayal, all of those things. Unfortunately, we also talked about the idea and the fact that when the heart is closed, your love can't get out either, which is far more devastating to us personally than love not getting in. Have you all ever experienced that to not love? It's why our animals are so precious, right? Because there's no trespassing signs on our heart for a dog. So we looked at Jesus' saying, we must become as little children to actually enter into the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven meaning right here on earth, the experience of joy and peace and love and happiness and wisdom, that we cannot walk around closed and really experience or receive that promise fully. So today, we have to talk about the dreaded F word. I'm going to tell you, I expected a lot more from you about that. So, does anybody know what the dreaded F word is in this room? Forgiveness. Yes. Forgiveness is defined as an intentional decision to let go of resentment and anger. To stop feeling angry towards someone for an offense, a flaw, or a mistake. Other words we can use instead of forgiveness is to pardon, to excuse, to exonerate. Would you please silence your phone? To absolve or quit. Now, our hearts are in straitjackets for good reason, really, because all of us, as we have also explored, have acquired through the dirt and grit of the journey many people situations where our hearts get bruised and battered. Is there anyone here whose heart has not been bruised and battered ever? Yeah, always. Not always, but occasionally. Or maybe always. So stay with me here. And this bruising and battering makes it, for most of us, almost impossible to forgive the one who did the bruising and the battering, because it lives with us forever. But as we must learn through the forgiveness practice, that forgiveness is about the restoration of our love, the restoration of our open-heartedness, not so much about letting someone off the hook. Forgiveness isn't about letting someone off the hook. And by the way, there's this wonderful saying in the Bible. It says, vengeance, I'm not going to remember the saying. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. Retribution is mine, not yours, essentially. The Lord, in metaphysical terms, means the law. And the law of cause and effect has, there are actions and reactions. There are actions and consequences. The consequences for acts, for unkindness, for the bruising will happen automatically. It's not ours to do. So the consequences of unforgiveness are dire in our world, both for us personally and for the world we live in. Unforgiveness makes you sick. Unforgiveness causes anxiety. It causes depression. It causes addiction. It causes physical illness, all linked to anger and resentment. We were made, last time we talked, we were made to be love bunnies. We're made to be gentle beings. We're made to be open. So when we hold that in, it doesn't do well. Obviously, in the world, it's obvious, is it not, what the end result of unforgiveness, resentment, and anger is. So it is very human from an ego perspective to not forgive. It's also true that everyone, we all have a story. Hopefully many of you have stopped telling the story, but almost all of us have a story of being battered and bruised, which explains why we are the way we are now. And there's really only about 7 stories in the whole world. All 8 billion people, there's about 7 stories. There's abuse, there's abandonment, there's divorce, there's, you know what I mean. We all have stories. And when we tell those stories to explain why things are the way they are, that may be fine, and the world may understand, and you may get some sympathy, but who wants that? What you want is to soar. What you want is to love bodaciously. What you want is to be prosperous. What you want is to feel powerful and poised and confident. You don't want to feel good about your bruised hearts, no matter how many people commiserate with you. I'm going to tell you a story about this man named Peter, who was, it's a personal story, and I'm telling you because it was a mind-boggling, eye-opening, heart-opening experience for me. I worked for him. He was a Brit, and I worked for him at Loyola Marymount University. He was the director of the information department, and I was the director of the networking division. And we were like McCartney and Lennon together. We made beautiful work. And one day I hired a woman that used to work for me at General Telephone, a very good friend, and she came to work for me. And about a year into the working for me, something shifted. And ultimately what happened is, do you guys know what pillow talk is? Right. I knew that there was pillow talk going on because things I had said to her were coming out of his mouth, and things I said to him were coming out of her mouth. And there was a little bit of attitude from him towards me. Like John and Paul, well, I think they ended up fighting as well. So, but I was devastated. I was devastated. And no matter what I did, it just got worse and worse. So I finally went to the HR department to complain because I could see where this was going. And I was in the middle of my ministerial studies where we were learning to turn the other cheek. Right? To not fight, to just not fight with your enemies. So I was in a little bit of a conundrum, but I decided to leave. I decided that I would, rather than fight it, or try to change it or feel terrible all the time that I would just leave my post. So I did. They did severance me for a year. Keep me quiet, of course. They did severance me. But I carried around, now here's the real part of the story. I carried around this box of legal papers, and I never felt good. I was battered and bruised. I was so betrayed and so angry. And so, do you understand? I was so mad that my career was ruined, my friendship was ruined, my blah, blah, blah. So one day in my forgiveness journey, I decided I'd had enough of feeling so bad. So I took those box of legal papers and I found a trash can and I put them in the trash can and I burned them. So that I was never going to be able to pull them out of the closet and read them. I had to have read them 100 times. So I would never read them again. But here comes a really, really wonderful part of this story. About 4 days later, Peter called me to make amends. It was spectacular. Not the amends part, the love part. And we connected and we forgave each other, and to this day we are friends. So there is something wonderful in the possibility of letting ancient grudges go. I know this because I was free and he was free. So Henry Wadsworth Longfellow said, "If we could read the secret history of our enemies, we would find in each person's life sorrow and suffering enough to disarm all hostility." And this quote is pointing to the idea that we don't know how bruised and battered, what the dirt and grit of the journey is to the person who's acting out, or the person who's doing the bruising, or the person who's doing the abusing. We don't really know. And he's really saying, if we knew, we would handle it differently, we would feel differently. I had one more really wonderful experience with my stepfather, who, he's not here anymore, but I hated him. No, I did. I did. He came into my life when I was around 11. He was not a really good person. I'm not going to go into all the details about what the next 10 years were like for us, but after my mother died, I had this experience of going to see him, to visit him, where they lived. And it was probably about a year after she died, and I walked into the house, and all I saw was this. He wasn't a monster. I didn't see the monster. I saw an old, sad man who fell into my arms and just said, "You look so much like your mama." And it was like instantaneously, I could see what Henry Wadsworth Longfellow was talking about, that I had no idea what his life was like, but I promise you it was terrible. And he just brought, that until we forgive, terrible follows terrible, follows terrible, follows terrible. And that I learned in that moment that the only way out of the cycle of terrible is love. And the person who's in the terrible it can't really do that for themselves usually, unless, of course, they get on a spiritual path of some kind or say yes to an angel visitation or something. But we can. If you have a person like that in your life, you can change them through loving them. So, it seems to me as if there are really 3 layers in our forgiveness process. And I think, I don't really know the order yet, though I'm going to tell you through my contemplation this week, I think the order is unique to each individual depending on your journey, depending on where the battering and bruising came from, depending on many, many things. But I think there's a necessity to forgive ourselves, to forgive other people, and to forgive God. Now, obviously, God doesn't need our forgiveness in any way. But for many of us, depending on our faith walk in life, our religious and spiritual history, I have met many and talked to many people who are pretty mad at life. Mad at life for taking a loved one, mad at life for burning down the house, mad at life for the terrible circumstances. And that could look like, why doesn't God answer my prayers? Big one is, why did God let that happen? Why did God let that happen? Don't we have that sometimes, right? With wars and 9/11 and all kinds of things. So, but I want to say to you, as always, that God is a God of love, period. There's no God and, period. Now, that's a little radical idea because mostly we think there's God and good and evil, God and the devil. There's no God and. And the amazing job that God does do is he cleans up the mess. So when through the dirt and grit and the bruising something bad happens, God comes in, swoops in with love, swoops in with comfort, swoops in with solutions, swoops in with kindness, swoops in with angels of mercy. Do you understand what I'm talking about? This is all very serious. But I suppose this is kind of serious, isn't it? So, so the mischief on our planet, if God were up there, I'm pretty sure she's looking down. Thank you. She's looking down, having given us all the tools we need to create heaven on earth, the power to create. We have the power to do anything. We can create paradise. And I'm sure she's either moderately or pervasively confused, going, why are you doing that? Right? So we do that. More specifically, the ego does that, and then angels have to be dispersed, and love has to be dispersed, and the cleanup crew has to be let go in order to provide restoration of love. So then the issue, of course, is other people, and we've mostly been talking about other people. We get to, this song is so beautiful because ultimately I do believe it all comes down to forgiving ourselves. But I'm not sure that's the first spot for all people. Some people have to start with God. I forgive, to get a new perspective about God and God's role in our lives. And obviously, with other people, it is a true statement that if people knew better, they would do better. Right? If people were loved enough as children, they would be kinder adults. If they were on their spiritual path, having connected to their inner divinity and their inner magnificence, they would treat you with that same respect. So Ann Lander said, holding on to resentment is like letting someone you despise live rent-free in your head. Do you guys remember Ann Landers? Yeah. So we all know that that's true, right? I mean, even like with Peter, my box of Peter documents, I would just read them and spiral and spiral and spiral. So all that airspace, right, all that headspace gets used up being angry at people. It is a spiritual principle for us to not judge. In Luke it says, judge not, and you will not be judged. Condemn not, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. My favorite really is John, where they're getting ready to stone this woman for adultery, I believe. And Jesus just says, all right, let the one among you who has never made a mistake or done anything wrong, you throw the first stone. And of course, everybody's like this. Nobody's throwing stones. It's because we've all made mistakes. Now, so forgiving is not about condoning the behavior, right? It's not about saying, oh, it's okay that you did that to me, or it's okay that you blew up the building, or it's not about that at all. It's about love. It's about recognizing that there is no spot where God is not. There's no good people and evil people. Now, is there good behavior and bad behavior? Of course. But the bad behavior will never stop. It'll go on for perpetuity until love gets introduced into the hearts of those who are doing bad behavior. Does that make sense? Yeah. And who's going to do that if not for us? Right? If not for you and I. And what makes us think it's possible if I can't forgive, if I can't bring love to you and forgive you and look past your silliness or your missteps, why would we think anyone can do it? If we can't establish peace in our own hearts, why would we think that the Russians could, or the Irish could, or whoever's arguing with each other? But if we do it, then we kind of spread out this little spray of, okay, maybe I can do it too. Maybe I can. So that leaves us with just ourselves left. And it's a little bit complicated because in truth, in the spiritual, the deepest metaphysical truth, if you were to go in meditation for 10 hours, at the end of those 10 hours, you would recognize and realize that there's only one of us here. That there's really not God, me, and you. That the bodies make it appear as if there are others. So this unforgiveness, this resentment, this anger, this judgment gets mushed a little bit. Ken Keyes from the Handbook of Higher Consciousness says, a loving person lives in a loving world, a hostile person lives in a hostile world, and everyone you meet is your mirror. So if you walk, right, the master metaphysics class is you put on your shoes in the morning, walk out the door, and go live life. That's your master class. And Ken Keyes is saying that if you meet a hostile world, guess what? The hostility is in you, not in the world. And that is such a radical, we say that so easily. It is such a radical idea that there isn't anything out there that isn't in you. So, therefore, we have to forgive the one who matters most. And that's you. And I'm not going to tell you any more, not going to tell you the stories where I was the one, but before my journey of awakening, whatever that means, my journey of recognizing my own magnificence, my own loving nature, my own self-respect and self-regard, there were many things I did and said that under other circumstances I would have never done and said had I known. Are there anybody else in this room there where you can say that? Because when you forgive yourself, then there's this newfound self-respect, self-regard, self-love of self. We're told, don't be so conceited. Don't love yourself. It's like, nah, they're wrong. That's the ego talking, right? Because the ego's job is to keep you as humble as possible. But the Spirit's job is to exalt you. And so once you are exalted, then the world is healed in truth. One person, the whole world can be healed. But certainly, as Ann Lenders said, we want to get the ones in your rent-free in your mind. We want to evict them. Yes? Yes. So do you feel ready to forgive? Yes. Reminds me of another joke. This 96-year-old woman, this minister was preaching on a Sunday morning. He's doing his forgiveness talk, and he says about halfway through, he goes, all right, how many people in here are ready to forgive? And a lot of people raise their hands, right? Not everyone, but a lot of people. And he keeps talking about the Bible and doing quotes, and pretty soon he says again, is there anyone else? So now how many of you are ready to forgive? And more and more of the community raises their hand. So he keeps, but he notices there's this very elderly woman in the back row, probably in her 90s. Well, I shouldn't say the elderly, forget the very. I'll never hear the end of it. This elderly woman in the back row. So at the end of his whole talk, he raised, now, how many people in here are finally ready to forgive? And everyone but this elderly woman raises her hand. So he walks down there and he goes, Madam, how can it be? Come up here with me, come up here. So he brings her up and he goes, how can it be that you are 96 years old and you have no one to forgive? Well, they've all died. Yeah. That was it. They've all died. She outlived them. Actually, I think she said she outlived them all. That's one way to do it, but I don't think it's the best way to do it. Because as Edwene Gaines said, if you can actually let this idea change you, your life will be different. You will then walk in joy. Even when somebody misbehaves around you, it'll be like taking a can of non-stick spray, spraying yourself, and there'll be no more dirt and grit on your journey. And even if there is a little bit, you'll get rid of it very quickly. All right, so I'm going to have you repeat a few things after me, after which we'll pray. Are you ready? All right. And you can say this out loud, or you can say them in your heart. But it might be nice if you close your eyes and focus for a moment on where there's any unforgiveness in you, whether it's for God, for self, or other. And it doesn't really matter. Don't beat yourself up if there's nothing, or if there's a lot. Just be with it. And then repeat after me, silently or aloud, I am washed clean of the dirt and grit of my journey. With my heart open, I am letting love circulate. I forgive life for letting me down along the way. I forgive others with compassion and understanding. I let it all go, and I am free.